Today we're going to discuss federalism, or the idea of shared powers. So our goals for today to describe the concept of federalism, to explain and give examples of express, implied, and inherent and reserved powers, and to explain and give examples of exclusive, concurrent, and denied powers of various levels of government. So first of all, I want you to make a list of however many different levels or types of government you can think of. Ready, set, go. All right, now that you've got that list, let's look at how many levels of government there are in the United States. There is one national government. There are 50 state-level governments. There are over 3,000 county governments, 35,000 city and township governments, and over 48,000 special purpose districts. A special purpose district would be something like a school board or a library board. So you can see we have a lot of different levels of government in the United States. Now, according to the Constitution, there's two levels, the national government and the state government. Counties, cities, and special purpose districts all gain their powers from the states, and if the state wanted to take away those powers, they could at any time. So really we have two levels of government, national and state level, in the United States of America. So again, federalism is a division of power or shared powers between national and state level governments. So what that means is there's some stuff that the national government of the United States can do, some stuff that the states can do, and there's some stuff that they both can do. So if we look at it, again, we've said that local governments get their powers from the states. Now, you have this chart, and we're going to go through this fairly quickly because you do have the chart, and you can kind of look it up and take notes on your own. So we start out with two different types of power. There are delegated powers and there are reserved powers. And under delegated powers, we have three types of powers, expressed, implied, and inherent. And so if we start out with the idea of express powers, those are powers that are specifically listed in the Constitution. If you opened up the Constitution, you could find them written. They're what are known as enumerated powers. Now, most of these powers are found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, but there are other places in which powers are enumerated. This is all the stuff the national government can do. So, for example, establishing a post office, or regulating interstate commerce, or forming a militia, forming a military. These are all things that if you open the Constitution, you'd see the right to do them. Next, we have implied powers. Implied powers aren't actually written in the Constitution, but they are, as the word implies, they're implied. They are things that you would need to do in order to carry out the express powers. They are sometimes what are known as necessary and proper, or elastic powers. They're called elastic powers because they come from the elastic clause. Elastic, as you may know, is stretchy. This is the part of the Constitution where today the national government claims a lot of its right to do things from. They say that they are things that, because the Constitution says are necessary and proper for good government, they have the right to do them. So in order to carry out any of the express powers, we would have to have the implied powers. So for example, if we read the Constitution, it doesn't say anything about building highways or funding freeways, but we know that the government can do this. Why? Because in order to regulate interstate commerce, which is an express power, you would have to build roads. The final type of power we have is what is known as an inherent power. Inherent powers are not expressed, they're not listed in the Constitution, they're not implied. They are powers that because we're a state or because we're a country, we have the right to do them. They are things that every country in the world is just assumed to have the right to do. So because we're a state, because we're a country, we have the right to do them. For example, acquiring territory. There's nothing in the Constitution that says anything about how we're going to acquire more land or territory if we need to. There is nothing implied about it, but because we're a country, because we're a state in the world, we have the right to do so. Now, anything that is not expressed, implied, or inherent is what is known as a reserved power. And reserved powers go to the states. Reserved powers will always be state-level powers. These are granted by the 9th and the 10th Amendment. Really, the 10th Amendment. The 9th Amendment says anything not listed in the Constitution is still protected. The 10th Amendment says that those powers are given to the states. So because of the 10th Amendment, The reserve powers, anything not listed, is given to the states. So, for example, the right to get married, it's not anywhere in the Constitution, so that is something that state levels get to decide. And every state has different criteria for getting married. Same thing with getting a license. So a driver's license or a teacher's license or any kind of license, those are things that aren't listed in the Constitution. Therefore, the states have those powers. Now, there's another type of power known as concurrent power. Concurrent means that there are shared powers. There are things that both the national and the state level governments can do. For example, taxes. National government's allowed to collect taxes, so are the state level governments. And then there's what is known as a denied power. They are things that the government is not permitted to do. Not the national government, not the local government. No government has the right to do so. So, for example, violating any of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the government cannot do those things. They cannot violate the Constitution. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and look at all these powers that we've just looked at the chart. We'll go into a little bit more detail. So if it seems like we've already done some of this, well, we have. We're just going into more detail now. So again, federalism is this idea of shared powers between a central and smaller level governments. And so in our government, we have a national government, the federal government, and we have state level governments. And then the states create local governments. Some of the advantages of federalism, it means that we have representation that will accommodate a diverse society. So we've got a lot of different people in our country, and having different states allows us to control for different conditions. There are some things that really, in order to accommodate our diversity, states should have the right to do. We know that states need to run themselves in a little bit different manner, and so it gives a lot of flexibility to the states. But the advantage, of course, of having a national government, a central government, is that you protect the individuals. We want to give individuals certain rights and freedoms that are listed in the Constitution. We want to make sure that they're always protected, and we want to make sure that the government doesn't get too far involved in them. So if we go back to our founding days, we know that having a unitary government, a strong central government, that didn't work out very well. But we know that having a confederacy, having no power to the central government, that didn't work out very well either. So in order to create a strong central government that still has checks and balances, that still limits some of the powers of the national government, we've got the states. We've got the states to preserve their certain rights that have always existed. So if we want to look at some things that are state level powers, some of those reserve powers, for example, 1/3 of all states control liquor. If you are in Michigan, you can buy liquor if you're above the age of 21 until 2 in the morning. On the other hand, if you're in Minnesota, you can't buy past 10 o'clock. If you are in New Jersey and Oregon, you can't pump your own gasoline. You have to have a gasoline attendant pump it for you. I know it seems crazy. It's an old school law that just never has been changed. Nebraska only has one branch of government. They've got a unicameral legislature at the state level. So they're not bicameral at the state level. They are at the national level. And there are 5 states in the union that currently don't have a sales tax. I'll let you take a guess as to what they are. Actually, you can Google them and find that out. Some things that the national government can do. The national government is responsible for national defense, so forming a military. The national government can control foreign affairs. They can negotiate with other countries. The national government can intervene in a state of a natural disaster. So, for example, when Hurricane Katrina hit down in New Orleans, the national government stepped in to help out. The delegated powers are the powers that are actually listed in the Constitution, the expressed, implied, inherent. Again, we've talked about that before. So some of the express powers, some of the enumerated powers. So we've already talked about what an enumerated power is. Now, if we just look at a couple of them, they are the 27 powers given to Congress, given to the national government through Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. They are things like collecting taxes, coining money, printing money, controlling foreign and interstate commerce, commerce between other states within our union, controlling a military, declaring war. Patents and copyrights, important to protect your intellectual property. One of the things that allows America to have so much innovation is that people can invent and know that their inventions, or know that their books, or know that their music, or whatever creatively they do, is protected. Otherwise, what would stop me from inventing something really cool and then having you just steal it and produce the same thing? Patents and copyrights preserve individual property rights. Congress sets a standard for weights and measures. So in America, we use the English system. One of the reasons for this, it seems kind of silly to us today, but trade back in the day used to be very unstandardized, and farmers wouldn't know what they were trading for one thing for another, and so to standardize it, to create a standard set of weights and measures, that was important in order for commerce to happen. Some of the implied powers, so those things that aren't directly written into the Constitution, some of the elastic clause stuff that's been stretched over time, Congress can prevent discrimination, Congress can regulate interstate highways, Congress can control dams. These are all things that you won't find actually listed in the Constitution, but mainly in order to protect interstate commerce, Congress has the right to do these things. Other things that Congress or the government has the right to do that aren't directly listed in the Constitution: immigration and citizenship, deciding who can enter our country, deporting aliens, kicking people out who don't belong in the United States because they entered illegally, recognizing and protecting other nations. That's not something that's actually listed in the Constitution, but it's something that because we're a government we have the right to do. Acquiring territory, the Louisiana Purchase being the most famous example. This is something not actually listed in the Constitution, but it is a power because we are a government, we have the right to do. Now, some of the denied powers, things that the government can never do, things that the government is not allowed to do, includes exporting, levying export taxes. So you can't stop Americans from selling stuff to another country, can't tax them on the way out. Restricting religion, restricting speech, restricting the press, or anything else really listed in the Bill of Rights, those are powers that are denied to the national government. And then, of course, the reserve powers, they're not granted to the national government, they're not denied to the states, things that states need to deal with. For example, the drinking age. Every state has the drinking age of 21, but technically speaking, states have the right to change that. Issuing a license is something the states have the right to do. Controlling public schools is a major power of state-level governments. So if we want to look at a division of powers chart, there are delegated powers to the national government, reserve powers to the state government, concurrent powers, things that they both can do. And then there are powers that are denied to the national government, powers that are denied to the states, and powers that are denied to both. So again, if we want to look at more examples of national powers, things that are enumerated, given to the national government, or reserve powers, things that are given to the state governments, or concurrent powers, I'll encourage you to pause this, read it on your own, and know it for the test. And for the future, because it's important to know your rights. One thing found in our Constitution is what is known as the Supremacy Clause, which sets up what is known as the ladder of the laws. And just like there are different steps or rungs on a ladder, there are different steps to laws in the Constitution. The United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. There is no law that can violate the U.S. Constitution. So on the bottom level, we have city and county charters or ordinances. An ordinance is just a fancy name for a city law. There are state statutes, which is a fancy name for state laws. They will supersede city and county ordinances. Above the state laws is the state constitution. Above the state constitution, acts of Congress and treaties. And above acts of Congress and treaties, we've got the U.S. Constitution. I think one of the most important things we can talk about is recent trends in power. Now, even though the Constitution has not changed, even though the document has not changed, one thing that has changed is sort of the way we view power. Power more recently has been taken away from local governments and given to national governments. More and more, the national government is claiming to have more power, and they are claiming to do more things, as well as people are expecting the national government to do more things. So, for example, when Hurricane Katrina hit, technically, in some respects, it was the power of the national government to step in, but a lot of people would say that, well, maybe the states have the right to do that, but we see more and more intervention from the national government. We see people expecting the national government to step up and step in. Same thing with education. Technically, education is a reserve power. It's reserved to the states. But more and more, because of the elastic clause, we are expecting the national government to get involved in education. We keep looking more and more to the president to be a strong leader for Congress to be strong leaders. And so even though technically speaking, power isn't increasing or decreasing, officially, according to the way things are written, the way we interpret in our expectations are that the federal government, the national government, is gaining more power. Well, that's all, folks. That's all we've got for today, and we will pick up tomorrow with another lesson.